Is money the root of all evil? To answer this question, I've used the most advanced AI technology to recreate the brilliant minds of Adam Smith and John Maynard Keynes. Smith, known as the father of modern economics, believed that the market, guided by self-interest, could benefit society as a whole. Keynes, one of the most influential economists of the 20th century, argued that unregulated markets lead to chaos, requiring intervention to safeguard collective well-being. This debate will be divided into 4 rounds. In the first round, I'll pose the main question. In the following rounds, each debater will raise a question to challenge the other. Finally, I'll ask one last question to conclude the discussion with a reflection. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more epic debates like this one. Now, without further ado, let's get started. Is money the root of all evil? Or is it a neutral tool, shaped by human intentions? Mr. Adam Smith, you may begin.
Thank you. Let's start by dispelling a common misconception. Money in itself is neither good nor evil. It's a tool, a human invention designed to facilitate trade and promote progress. Before money, we relied on barter, a limited and inefficient system. Money brought organization, productivity, and the ability to generate wealth on a larger scale. Consider the Industrial Revolution. It was the freedom to create and innovate, fueled by the circulation of money, that led to the technological and social advancements that shaped the modern world. Without money, how would we build organized societies or undertake large-scale endeavors? Yet we often blame money for society's ills when, in reality, it merely reflects human intentions. When used with prudence and virtue, money can act as a catalyst for collective well-being. A freely functioning market allows individual self-interest to benefit society as a whole. I call this the invisible hand, a concept that illustrates how individual actions, guided by personal goals, can contribute to the greater good. So, instead of blaming money, we should take a closer look at our choices. Money is nothing more than a mirror of our values and priorities.
Smith, your ideas have theoretical merit, but reality tells a different story. While I agree that money is a tool, it is far from neutral in its impact. When hoarded unequally or used without a social purpose, it can lead to devastating crises, as we saw during the Great Depression. Take the 2008 financial crisis, for example. The unrestrained pursuit of profit led to irresponsible financial practices that collapsed entire economies, leaving millions unemployed and homeless. And if it weren't for government intervention, who would have saved those people from losing everything? The problem is that the market is not this perfectly self-regulating force you describe. Leaving money in the hands of individuals or corporations, trusting that they'll act virtuously, is idealistic. History has shown us that without clear limits, money becomes a driver of greed, corruption, and inequality. We need public intervention to ensure money is used for society's benefit, not as a tool of domination. Without regulation, markets create imbalances that disproportionately affect the most vulnerable. So, while money isn't inherently evil, it requires ethical and social oversight to prevent its destructive impact.
Keynes, I acknowledge your concern, but blaming money for inequality is a mistake. Money doesn't create greed or corruption. These are human traits. Economic freedom is essential for progress, and restricting money would be like limiting the fuel of innovation. Look at the startups of the last century. They thrived not because of regulations, but because of a market that encouraged creativity and competition. When people have the freedom to pursue their interests, they create solutions that benefit everyone. What we need is not more regulation, but a commitment to moral values. It's the absence of virtue, not money itself, that leads to abuse. Instead of expanding state control, we should focus on educating people to use money responsibly and ethically.
Smith, I don't deny the importance of economic freedom, but blindly trusting individual morality is naive. Greed isn't the exception. It's the rule in unregulated markets. And that greed, combined with the lack of regulation, creates monopolies, crises, and poverty. Furthermore, governments don't exist to stifle freedom but to protect it. Without public policies, who ensures the vulnerable won't be exploited? Without regulation, businesses can exploit workers, destroy the environment, and create extreme, inequalities. Consider this scenario. Imagine a worker in a completely unregulated economy. They have no choice because the market dictates everything, and those at the top set the terms. It's to prevent this imbalance that the state must intervene, not to stifle, but to balance.
Keynes, you speak as though government is a perfect and altruistic entity, but we know it is also composed of individuals susceptible to greed and corruption. The difference is that the market provides a natural corrective mechanism, competition. When the government overregulates, it stifles individual initiative and creates dependency. Remember how many authoritarian regimes have used economic control to maintain power. What we need is less state control and more encouragement for people to act ethically on their own. Let healthy competition address abuses, rather than concentrating power in the hands of bureaucracy.
Smith, competition is a nice idea, but it's often unrealistic. Large corporations crush smaller competitors, creating monopolies and inequalities that the free market alone cannot fix. How many times has the absence of regulation led to environmental or financial disasters? While imperfect, government is an essential tool to prevent the market, in its unrestricted freedom, from causing more harm than good. The balance you so admire can only be achieved when both the market and government work together for the well-being of society.
That concludes round one with thought-provoking arguments from both sides. Now we move on to round two, where Adam Smith will pose the next question for the debate.
Keynes, by limiting the role of money, aren't you stifling the creativity and freedom that drive human progress? Imagine a society where every innovation required state approval. How could we have revolutionized technology the way we did in the 20th century? It was economic freedom that enabled the rise of companies and ideas that shaped the world. Without it, progress would be painfully slow.
Smith, the notion that unrestricted freedom promotes progress is at best idealistic. During the Industrial Revolution, which you so admire, we saw significant technological advancements, but also rampant exploitation of workers and stark inequalities. Advancements like those we see today, including many 20th century technologies, were only possible because of state intervention. Consider the economic stimulus programs during World War II. Without government investment in research, leading to the creation of modern computing or nuclear energy, many of these innovations wouldn't exist. Letting the market operate unchecked can stifle justice and equality, ensuring progress benefits the few while leaving many behind. Regulation doesn't stifle creativity. It creates a fair playing field where everyone can compete and thrive. You advocate for freedom, but forget that many people don't even have access to the tools to exercise it.
Keynes, the conditions you describe weren't permanent. It was economic freedom and competition that eventually corrected those inequalities. As markets mature, more ethical companies emerge, treating workers better to attract top talent and satisfy increasingly discerning consumers. What you propose, however, fosters dependency on a state that doesn't always operate in the public's best interest. How many times have we seen governments waste public funds or prioritize their own agendas? An over-regulated system can stifle individual initiative and limit innovation. We need a market that allows freedom to create, compete, and grow, something state control rarely offers.
Smith, conflating freedom with the absence of rules is a mistake. Without regulation, the freedom you so admire becomes a privilege for the few. Competition doesn't solve everything, as you suggest. Large corporations often use their influence to crush smaller competitors and consolidate power. As for the state, it may not be perfect, but when well managed, it serves as the necessary mediator to balance market forces that would otherwise remain unequal. Without public policies that ensure access to education, healthcare, and infrastructure, how can people compete on equal footing? Regulation doesn't stifle creativity. It creates the conditions for it to flourish equitably.
Keynes, your argument ignores the fact that many monopolies don't emerge from free markets, but from state intervention, protecting large corporations from competition. Even where monopolies arise, innovation from smaller companies eventually challenges the giants. Bureaucracy, on the other hand, creates artificial barriers that suffocate creativity. Think of how many startups were born in garages, driven by economic freedom, not regulations. To turn money into a force for human progress, we need fewer restrictions and more encouragement for competition, not more state control.
Your faith in the market's ability to self-regulate is admirable, but misguided. Without regulation, many people would never even have the opportunity to compete in the first place. Markets are shaped by pre-existing social and economic conditions, and those who already hold advantages will continue to accumulate them. And what about the startups you mentioned? Many of them thrived only because public policies supported education, infrastructure, and even tax incentives. True progress isn't merely a product of freedom. It's the result of structures that make that freedom accessible to everyone. Without these, the market reinforces inequality rather than resolving it.
Keynes, the incentives you mention are not always distributed fairly. Governments often prioritize political interests over the well-being of the population. Economic freedom is the best tool to ensure that resources are used efficiently. A free market is not a market without rules, but one where the rules are simple and clear, allowing individuals and businesses to innovate without fear of excessive intervention. Over-regulation doesn't shape progress, it limits its speed and reach.
And you, Smith, ignore that an unregulated market is a battlefield where the weakest are crushed. Without regulation, progress is not sustainable. It is unequal and often destructive. My vision is not of a centralizing state, but of a mediator that ensures balance. We need rules that encourage progress, but also protect the most vulnerable. Freedom without justice isn't freedom. It's privilege.
That concludes round 2. We've witnessed a heated discussion about the roles of economic freedom and regulation in human progress. Now let's move to round 3, where John Maynard Keynes will pose the next question.
Smith, do you truly believe that unchecked human greed can lead to sustainable balance? History teaches us that without limits, greed becomes a destructive force. Consider the Great Depression. Investors driven by greed created a bubble that, when it burst, devastated entire economies. And what saved the markets? It wasn't self-regulation. It was government intervention. Moreover, large corporations often don't play to compete. They play to dominate. They create barriers that crush smaller competitors and consolidate power. Without regulation, these practices become the norm, not the exception. So I ask again, if the market is so efficient, why does it so often create crises that only the state can resolve?
Keynes, greed is inherent to human nature and doesn't disappear with government intervention. In fact, it manifests just as much in government as in the market. The difference is that the market has a natural corrective mechanism: competition. The monopolies you mention are largely created or protected by regulations that prevent new competitors from entering. When left alone, markets have the ability to adjust. Companies that abuse power or mistreat their customers and employees create opportunities for more ethical and efficient competitors. Furthermore, attributing the role of savior to the government overlooks its own flaws. How often have governments misused resources or perpetuated privileges to protect political interests? What we need is less regulation, not more. True economic freedom is the only antidote to unchecked greed.
Smith, your belief that the market always corrects itself is charming, but disconnected from reality. Monopolies are not temporary flaws. They are systemic outcomes of unregulated markets. Even when new competitors try to emerge, large corporations often create barriers to maintain their dominance. Moreover, competition doesn't solve issues of social justice. Think of workers exploited in subhuman conditions who have no choice but to accept abusive jobs. The government, despite its imperfections, is the only entity capable of setting limits and ensuring progress is distributed fairly. If competition is the solution to everything, why do monopolies continue to thrive in capitalist economies? And who protects the most vulnerable when the market fails?
Monopolies often arise not because of freedom, but because of regulations that favor large corporations and block new competitors. Remove these barriers, and you will see the market naturally correct imbalances. As for the workers you mentioned, the market's dynamics create incentives for improvement. Companies that offer better conditions attract the best talent, forcing their competitors to follow suit. It's not government intervention that raises standards. It's healthy competition. And please, let's not idealize the government as an altruistic entity. When you give it the power to intervene in the market, you open the door to corruption, favoritism, and inefficiency. I'd rather trust the dynamism of the market than rely on a bureaucracy that frequently prioritizes its own interests over those of society.
This idea that the market alone creates incentives for improvement doesn't explain why we had to fight so hard to achieve basic rights like fair wages and decent working conditions. It wasn't the market, but social movements and government intervention that secured these fundamental advances. You talk about removing barriers, but many of these are necessary to prevent abuse. If the market were as efficient as you claim, why do we continue to face financial crises, extreme inequalities, and environmental degradation? These aren't temporary problems. They are symptoms of a system that requires guidance and limits. As for corruption in government, that's a valid concern, but it doesn't negate the fact that without regulation, the market also perpetuates injustices. A balanced system requires the market and the state to work together, each limiting the other's excesses.
Keynes, you seem to ignore that many of the crises you mention were amplified by poorly planned state interventions. The 2008 crisis, for example, was exacerbated by policies that encouraged irresponsible financial practices. My proposal isn't a market without rules, but a market where the rules are clear, simple, and promote competition. Monopolies don't thrive in free markets. They thrive in markets where regulations create artificial barriers. I trust in the market's ability to correct its own excesses, provided we allow it to operate freely. Your vision of a collaborative state is appealing, but in practice it often acts as an inefficient intermediary that creates more problems than it solves.
Smith, your confidence in the market is admirable, but evidence shows that it often fails to deliver the efficiency and fairness you champion. Crises like the Great Depression weren't caused by over-regulation. They were the result of a lack of regulation. My view doesn't discard the market, but acknowledges that it needs clear limits to protect people from its failures. The state isn't perfect, but it's the only tool we have to address the imbalances the market alone cannot resolve. Sustainable progress requires balance, not the unrestricted freedom you advocate.
That concludes round 3 with a profound discussion on greed, competition, and the roles of the market and the state. Now we move to round 4, where I'll pose the final question to close this debate. If you could reformulate the global economic system today, how would you ensure that money benefits humanity rather than becoming a source of suffering? Mr. Adam Smith, please begin with your response.
To reformulate the global economic system, I believe we must prioritize economic freedom as a fundamental principle. However, this freedom must be guided by robust ethical values to ensure its proper use. Money is a powerful tool that reflects our choices. By encouraging healthy competition and reducing bureaucratic hurdles, we can unlock people's potential to innovate and create solutions. We need to simplify regulations that stifle small businesses and promote policies that reward productivity and creativity. Moreover, it is crucial to strengthen local markets, empowering communities to solve their own challenges without over-reliance on large-scale government interventions. When economic success is directly tied to positive societal impact, we can transform money into a force for collective progress. Economic freedom, coupled with strong moral principles, is the path to ensuring money benefits humanity.
Your proposal for economic freedom certainly has its merits, but it overlooks the structural inequalities that limit many people's ability to compete fairly. To ensure money truly benefits humanity, we need a model that balances the strength of the market with firm and compassionate regulation. I propose a hybrid system where the state plays an active role in reducing inequalities, ensuring universal access to quality education and healthcare. These are foundational elements that enable everyone to compete on equal footing. Additionally, the state should invest strategically in sectors that serve the greater good, such as technology, infrastructure, and sustainability. A free market is indeed a powerful tool, but without a regulatory framework that ensures social justice, It will continue to privilege the few while disadvantaging the many. True progress requires a balance between economic freedom and strategic state intervention.
Keynes, your vision of a hybrid model is theoretically appealing, but in practice, when governments take on a central role, they often create dependency. This stifles individual initiative and limits people's ability to act on their own. The solution isn't more state control but greater economic freedom. Companies and individuals, when incentivized, find creative and effective ways to solve problems. Empowering local communities which understand their own needs better is a far more efficient approach than imposing centralized solutions. If we reduce bureaucracy and create an environment where ethics are valued, we can achieve progress without the constraints of an overbearing state.
Smith, I understand your concern about excessive intervention, but your trust in unrestricted freedom ignores real risks. Without regulation, markets become fertile grounds for monopolies and economic crises that harm the most vulnerable. Empowering communities is a noble idea, but without state support, many of them are left without the resources necessary to thrive. This isn't about centralizing control. It's about creating a system where the state plays a moderate and strategic role, providing the infrastructure and opportunities needed for collective progress. The state is not a natural oppressor. It is an essential mediator to balance market forces and protect the weakest members of society.
Keynes, what you call mediation often turns into excessive control. History is full of examples of governments that began as mediators, but ended up stifling individual and economic freedoms. I don't completely reject the need for regulation, but it must be minimal and carefully designed. The focus should be on creating conditions that allow people to innovate and compete freely, because that's where the solutions that truly transform societies arise. Economic freedom, paired with individual responsibility, is the best tool to ensure money is used for the betterment of humanity.
My proposal is not for total control, but for balance. I agree that freedom is essential, but it must be structured within limits that ensure social justice and sustainability. A vibrant market, combined with a social safety net that guarantees equal opportunities for all, is the most efficient model. Sustainable progress requires both the strength of the market and the strategic guidance of the state. Neglecting either element leads to ineffective and unbalanced systems.
I believe we are closer in our views than it might seem. You acknowledge that the market plays a central role in progress, and I concede that some regulations are necessary to ensure a fair playing field. The question is, where do we draw the line? If the government intervenes only to establish basic rules and punish abuses, without stifling competition or creating dependency, we can find common ground. The problem arises when the state becomes a dominant actor and prevents the market from functioning freely.
Smith, I agree that the state should not be a dominant actor. Its role is to create conditions for the market to operate fairly and sustainably. But history shows us that without these interventions, market forces often fail to distribute benefits equitably. What I propose is a balance. Enough regulation to prevent abuses, but enough freedom to encourage creativity and innovation. In this way, we can ensure that money, rather than dividing, becomes a force that unites and benefits society as a whole.
And so we reach the end of this extraordinary debate, a clash of ideas that tackled not just the role of money, but also the essence of how we build fair, innovative, and sustainable societies. On one side, Adam Smith passionately defended economic freedom as the engine of human progress, emphasizing how free markets, guided by ethical values, can transform money into a force for collective well-being. On the other, John Maynard Keynes presented a balanced vision, arguing that while markets are essential, they require strategic regulation to ensure progress is inclusive and money benefits all, especially the most vulnerable. Now, we want to hear from you. Which vision resonated more with your beliefs? Do you trust in the power of a free and ethical market, as Adam Smith proposed? Or do you agree with the necessity of a regulatory state to shape progress into an inclusive force, as argued by John Maynard Keynes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And what other historical figures or philosophical economic questions would you like to see debated here on the channel? If this debate made you reflect or gave you new perspectives, Don't forget to like this video and share it with friends. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next episodes, where we'll continue exploring ideas that challenge how we think and see the world. Here, we create a space for the meeting of ideas, for constructive disagreements, and above all, for debates that challenge us to think more deeply and meaningfully. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, money doesn't define who we are, but the choices we make with it do. See you in the next debate.